All right, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating and honestly kind of mind-bending theory about communication. It's all about how you make impossible-sounding claims actually stick, especially when nobody has any idea who you are. Let's get into it.
So just imagine for a second, you've got this radical, world-changing idea, a genuine breakthrough. But you've got no credentials, no fancy title, no university backing you up. How in the world do you get people to even listen to you, let alone believe you? I mean, you're facing a huge uphill battle.
Because what you're talking about isn't just some small tweak or a minor improvement. No, we're talking about what the source material for this calls a 1 in 1,000 claim. Something so far out there, it just sounds like it shouldn't even be possible. So that brings us to our first big idea. We've got to understand the psychological wall that every single one of these radical ideas smacks into right at the beginning. And that wall has a name: regression-to-the-mean bias. It's basically a mental shortcut our brain uses all the time. It just assumes, hey, wild, extraordinary claims are almost always wrong. The real truth is probably boring and somewhere in the middle. So when we hear something crazy from a total unknown, our brain pretty much automatically files it under, yeah, probably not. But here's the thing. That bias is usually right. It's not a bug in our thinking, it's a feature. It's a super effective filter that saves us from falling for nonsense all day long. And that means you can't just persuade your way around it by, being friendlier or watering down your language. That bias is there for a very good reason. Okay, so if you can't just politely talk your way around this bias, what's left? Well, this leads to a huge strategic choice, a real fork in the road for anyone making one of these massive claims. And this, right here, is where the paradox really kicks in. On one path, you have what's called the humble register. It sounds polite, it sounds reasonable, and it gets completely and utterly ignored. But then there's the other path, the Holden Paradox voice. It's sharp, it's absolute, and it's impossible to ignore. It makes a claim so strong you have no choice. You either have to attack it or you have to accept it. And this quote just nails it, right? Using that aggressive voice isn't just about style. The source argues it's basically a forced move. It's a structural necessity. Why? Because for a claim this big, there is no effective middle ground. Any hint of uncertainty from you just confirms the other person's bias that you're probably wrong anyway. In fact, it goes even deeper than that. The argument is that if you soften your claim just to make it easier for people to hear, you're actually being dishonest. You're committing what's called epistemic dishonesty. You're signaling less confidence than you actually have, and that misleads your audience about what you really know to be true. All right, so how does this actually work in practice? Let's get into the mechanics here. This next section is all about the core engine of the Holden Paradox. It's not about persuading people. It's about using their attacks against them to build proof. I absolutely love this analogy. Your claim has to be like quicksand. You can't just dip a toe in. You can't just say, oh, that's an interesting perspective. Nope. The absolute sharpness of the claim forces everyone into a binary choice. You have to engage and try to tear it down, or you have to back away and accept it. There's no middle ground for polite dismissal.
So here's the play-by-play. First, you make that sharp, impossible-to-ignore claim. Second, because it's so provocative, you attract attacks, often from experts. Third, and this is the magic part, those attacks completely fail. They find no holes, they just dissolve. And finally, anyone watching this happen updates their own belief. Not because you convinced them with a fancy speech, but because they just saw your claim survive a fight that everyone expected it to lose. And for any of this to work, your argument can't just be good. It has to be perfect. I mean, perfect. We are talking zero holes. Because that regression to the mean bias we talked about, it's making the reader actively look for a reason to dismiss you. Any single flaw, no matter how tiny, gives them the out they're looking for, and your entire argument just collapses. And this just drives that point home. It doesn't matter if a Nobel laureate is the one attacking your claim. In this game, there's no such thing as a partial hit. The attack either completely destroys your argument or it fails. And if it fails, your claim actually comes out stronger than before. It's all or nothing. But as you can probably guess, communicating this way, well, it has a huge cost. This whole method is a classic double-edged sword. It creates both a blessing and a very, very real curse. The curse is pretty much immediate hostility. You see, when a senior expert hears a massive, impossible-sounding claim from some random person, their finely tuned bias detector goes off. They dismiss it instantly. And you have to understand that's not a failure of the system. That is the system working exactly as it should 999 times out of 1,000.
So this lays out the two outcomes perfectly. On one side, you get the curse. A lot of people, especially those with existing credentials, will just be annoyed. They'll walk away thinking you're arrogant or a crackpot, and they'll never actually engage with your ideas. But on the other side, you get the blessing. The very same provocation forces a different group of people to engage deeply. And when they do the work and see every attack fail, they're the ones whose minds are actually changed.
So, you might be thinking, wow, this sounds exhausting and incredibly risky. How could anyone possibly sustain this kind of communication? Well, there's a broader strategy behind the scenes that actually makes it possible. It's all about playing the long game with what's called the stream. The idea is to post constantly at a really high frequency. By doing that, no single post has to carry the weight of the entire argument. If one post doesn't land right or draws a really effective attack, who cares? It just gets buried by the next one tomorrow. But the ones that do survive, the ones that successfully fend off attacks, those start to stack up like evidence. Over time, it's the cumulative effect of the whole stream that really shifts people's beliefs.
So let's be super clear on the takeaway here. This is not a guide for being a jerk on the internet. It is a very specific, very high-stakes strategy that only applies in a super rare situation. When your claim is truly massive, your credentials are zero, and you know with absolute certainty that you are right. And that really leaves us with this one last question to think about. If watering down your claim to be more likable is actually a kind of dishonesty, then when is being sharp, absolute, and even provocative the most honest way you can possibly communicate?